How well do you know your neighbors? Perhaps they're the kind of people you can talk to across the fence and borrow cups of sugar from. Or perhaps they are torturing and killing people in their basement. Here are 5 stories of the most prolific killers in the world. Number 5. Fred and Rose West, 25 Cromwell Street, England. Marriages are most effective when both parties share common interests, such as hiking, antiquing, or murdering children. Fred and Rosemary West of Gloucester, England, shared a passion. The horrors that occurred at their residence on 25 Cromwell Street are almost too horrible to describe. Fred and Rosemary both had horrific childhoods filled with incest and abuse. They met on November 29, 1968, her 15th birthday, when he was 27 years old. On her 16th birthday, they moved in together. Between December 1970 and June 1971, Fred was imprisoned for theft, leaving Rosemary to care for Fred's 2 kids from his first marriage, Anne-Marie and Charmaine. She mistreated them mercilessly, eventually killing Charmaine in June. When the girl's mother arrived to see her children in August, she was also killed. The pair married in 1972, and Fred forced his wife into prostitution. She fell pregnant multiple times and gave birth to a total of 7 children. As their family grew, the Wests relocated to a larger home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester. The pair sexually tortured their children, frequently videotaping the horrific crimes. They murdered at least 12 non-family members, all of them were women, in brutal sex crimes. One of the victims was Lucy Catherine Partington, novelist Martin Amis' cousin. In 1987, they murdered their own daughter, Heather Ann, most likely because the 17-year-old threatened to expose them. Fred then disciplined his children, telling them that if they did not behave, they would end up under the patio like Heather. In 1992, one of Fred's daughters told a friend that her father had raped her. The police investigated, and after learning about Heather's disappearance, they got a search order. They discovered 3 bodies in the backyard, including Heather, and 9 more in the cellar. Fred attempted to accept full responsibility for the murders in order to protect Rosemary, but both were found guilty. Fred killed himself in his cell, and Rosemary was condemned to life in jail. Like many notorious estates, 25 Cromwell Street was demolished. In October 1996, it was destroyed in such a way that no scraps remain for souvenir hunters. Today, the site is a manicured sidewalk that connects Cromwell Street and St. Michael's Square. Number 4. Gary Heidnick's house, 3520, North Marshall Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hannibal Lecter and other clever, ultra-cunning personalities frequently shape our perceptions of serial killers. The reality is usually more mundane. The average serial killer is of normal to subnormal intelligence. There are exceptions to this trend, such as Gary Heidnick, whose IQ was measured at 148, placing him squarely in the genius range. Despite his apparent intelligence, Heidnick dropped out of school to serve in the army. When he became ill with gastroenteritis, doctors quickly discovered indicators of mental disorder. He was later diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder and honorably discharged. Heidnick spent years in and out of mental facilities for various offenses, but he was astute enough to found his own church, the United Church of the Ministers of God, which made him wealthy. In 1986, he advanced from simple rape and assault to full-fledged kidnapping and torture, holding his first victim, Josefina Rivera, hostage in his basement at 3520 North Marshall Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Within 3 months, he and his accomplice, Cyril Tony Brown, who was moderately mentally challenged and most likely at Heidnick's mercy, had established a harem of 5 ladies in the basement, all young African Americans. Sandra Lindsay, 24, died as a result of the torture shortly after her capture. Heidnick disassembled her body, marking her arms and legs as dog food and freezing them. He baked her ribs and boiled her skull on top of the burner, The scent of smoking human flesh had the cops pounding on the door of 3520 N Marshall, but Heidnik explained that it was from a roast he had burned. He may have consumed part of Lindsay's meat or fed it to his other slaves. Another woman, Deborah Dudley, was killed when the chains that held her were electrocuted. In March 1987, Heidnik abducted Agnes Adams, his final victim. Josefina Rivera, the first captive, convinced Heidnik to release Adams. She ran for help, and the 3 other women in the house were rescued. Heidnik pled insanity, but was denied. On July 6, 1999, he was executed via lethal injection. Gary Heidnik's house still stands, a narrow and dilapidated beige stucco structure in North Philadelphia, just a few blocks from the apartment where Rocky Balboa lived in the original Rocky picture. Number 3. Ed Gein's house, corner of Archer and 2nd Avenues, Plainfield, Wisconsin. Any horror lover would recognize the name Ed Gein, who influenced a slew of fictional killers, including Norman Bates and Leatherface. Gein, like many demented people, had an unusual childhood. With an alcoholic father and a religious zealot mother, Ed and his brother, Henry, were kept socially isolated, and Ed grew hopelessly attached to his mother. His father died in 1940, and Henry started seeing a divorced local woman the following year. He was shortly discovered dead under suspicious circumstances, and he was most certainly Ed's first victim. Ed's mother suffered a stroke, and he was forced to wait on her hand and foot, exacerbating their relationship's psychotic state. She died in 1945, allowing Ed to pursue his dark obsessions. He began reading obituaries in order to raid graveyards for the freshest bodies, amassing a collection of female human remains that he transformed into a variety of apparel pieces, including masks, leggings, a corset, and a human nipple belt. In 1954, he assassinated tavern keeper Mary Hogan. He got away with it for a few years, but when local hardware shop owner Bernice Warden went missing, he was readily identified as her last customer. A police examination into Gein's land uncovered a slaughterhouse. Bernice, the mother of a Plainfield deputy, hanging from the ceiling after being skinned like a deer. Ed had partitioned off the areas of the house that his mother utilized, leaving them as an immaculate shrine. His cramped quarters of the house were littered with filth and stinky burial relics. Ed was convicted of first-degree murder, but after being declared insane, he spent the rest of his life in a mental facility. The mansion was scheduled for auction on March 30th, 1958, and speculation circulated that it might be used as a tourist attraction. 3 days before the auction, the home burned down, most likely due to arson. Today it is a wooded area, with no trespassing signs affixed to the trees. Number 2. Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home, 4480 West Bath Road, Bath Township, Ohio. If one killer deserves to be mentioned, it's him. In fact, Dahmer's childhood house has suddenly gained a new level of notoriety. In one of their strange publicity stunts, PETA animal extremists explored purchasing the building and converting it into a vegan restaurant called Eat for Life, Home Cooking. Despite stressing that their pitch was serious, PETA has subsequently altered their mind about the proposal. The house, which was listed for $329,000 in 2012, was the location of Dahmer's first murder. In 1978, he killed Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old hitchhiker. After burying Hicks in the backyard, he unearthed his body, dissolved the flesh in acid, shattered the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered the remnants. If you enjoy short stories like these, stick around for more after this. Number 1. The Lizzy Bordon House, 92 2nd Street, Fall River, Massachusetts. Your classic bed and breakfast is the epitome of serenity. Historical, family-run facilities with plenty of floral print wallpaper. Their usual draw is proximity to tourist attractions such as beaches. However, those with a decidedly morbid bent can stay in the former Bordon home, where Lizzy Bordon allegedly murdered her father and stepmother in cold blood. Andrew Bordon, a successful businessman, was noted for his frugal nature. For example, the family home lacked indoor plumbing, even though he could have afforded it. He was noted for being excessively generous with his wife's family, which caused difficulties between him and his daughters, Lizzy and Emma. According to folklore, the Bordons were murdered with an axe, although the actual murder weapon was a hatchet. Mrs. Bordon received one hit to the head, and as she fell, her killer sat on her back and beat the back of her skull 19 times. Andrew was most likely napping on a couch downstairs when he was struck 10 or 11 times, one of which split his eyeball in half. Lizzy was the one to discover his body. Despite her odd and inconsistent statements, Lizzy was acquitted of the murder. She and her sister used their large inheritance to purchase a new home in the prestigious Fall River neighborhood. Despite being severely shunned, she stayed there until her death in 1927. Today, 92 2nd Street houses the Lizzy Bordon Bed and Breakfast Museum. Rooms can be hired at a reasonable price, and each stay includes a tour of the building and its harrowing history. Many people believe the house is haunted, and ghost cameras are set up throughout the estate in the hopes of capturing some maimed specter.